right now, your smartphone is lying to you.
I mean, completely lying.
It feels totally weightless, right? You tap a screen, you ask a virtual assistant a question, you upload this massive photo album, and it all just seems to, float away into this magical, frictionless place we call the cloud.
The cloud.
Right.
Sounds so soft, ethereal, clean.
Exactly. But, and this is what we're getting into today, what if I told you the cloud isn't made of data packets and water vapor? What if it's actually made of toxic mud, lithium brine, shattered coral reefs, and exhausted human bodies?
It really shatters the illusion completely because we've been sold this incredibly comforting narrative, right?
Huh.
That the digital world is entirely divorced from the physical world.
Right.
That software is somehow immune to the messy, heavy realities of industrial extraction.
Well, before we dig into that toxic mud, I actually want to transport you, the listener, back to Europe at the end of the 19th century.
Oh, this is such a great story.
It really is. So the entire continent is obsessed with a horse. His name is Hans. Clever Hans. And this wasn't just, a horse that could bow or fetch a hat. Clever Hans could supposedly do complex math.
Yeah, he could tell time, read a calendar,
understand musical harmony, and even spell out full sentences. His owner was this retired math teacher named Wilhelm von Osten. He would stand in a courtyard, ask Hans, "What is the square root of 16?" And Hans would diligently tap his hoof 4 times.
And we really have to give von Osten some credit for sincerity here. He wasn't running a cheap carnival scam.
Right, he wasn't a grifter.
No, not at all. He had spent years trying to prove that animals possessed human-level reasoning. I mean, he tried teaching math to kittens and bear cubs before he found Hans.
Which is an amazing visual.
Right. But he genuinely believed his horse was a mathematical genius.
And the public bought it entirely. I mean, by 1904, the New York Times ran a headline declaring Hans could do almost everything but talk.
Which is wild.
But naturally, the scientific community was a bit skeptical. The German Board of Education assembled this thing called the Hans Commission.
Yeah, they brought in everyone. A psychologist, a circus manager, a veterinarian, a cavalry officer.
And they scrutinized this horse for months. They looked for hidden wires, secret mirrors, anything. They found absolutely zero evidence of trickery.
Nothing at all.
But then a young psychologist named Oscar Funkst changed the parameters of the test. He noticed that if you put blinders on the horse, or, and this is the key part, if the person asking the math question didn't actually know the answer themselves,
Hans suddenly became just a regular, clueless horse.
Exactly.
Which leads to the discovery of what we now call the clever Hans effect, or the observer expectancy effect.
Yeah.
Because when we look at the actual mechanism of the illusion, it's brilliant, but entirely unintentional.
Right.
Hans wasn't doing math. He was a master of reading microscopic, unconscious bodily cues. When von Osten asked a question, he would tense up, anticipating the correct number of hoof taps.
Just naturally tensing his muscles.
Yeah, and the moment Hans reached the right number, von Osten's posture would relax a fraction of a millimeter. His breathing would change. Hans simply learned that tapping his foot until the human relaxed resulted in a carrot.
The humans were literally feeding the horse the answers with their own muscle tension, and they had absolutely no idea they were doing it.
Yeah, they desperately wanted to see intelligence, so they just projected their own cognition onto the animal.
Which brings us to the core mission of this deep dive, because that projection is exactly what we're talking about today.
That exact phenomenon just updated for the 21st century.
Right. We so frequently mistake the mimicking of behavior for actual independent intelligence, whether it's a 19th century German stallion or a modern large language model generating a poem. We desperately want to believe there is a ghost in the machine.
We want the magic to be real.
We do. So today we are exploring the work of Kate Crawford, specifically her landmark book, Atlas of AI Power, Politics, and the Planetary Costs of Artificial Intelligence.
And Crawford is an absolute heavyweight in this field. She's a research professor at USC Annenberg, a senior principal researcher at Microsoft Research, and a scholar who has spent over a decade mapping the real-world fallout of algorithmic systems.
Yeah, her approach is fundamentally different from, a standard computer science textbook.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
She merges critical race theory, labor history, geology, tech policy. She looks at the entire life cycle of artificial intelligence.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because her foundational premise is a massive paradigm shift. She states right out of the gate that AI is neither artificial nor intelligent.
Right.
She argues it is embodied, it is material, and it is ultimately a technology of extraction. But I want to zero in on the title for a second. Why an atlas?
Well, the Atlas metaphor is a direct response to how the tech industry views itself. The architects of AI are constantly striving for this God's eye view of the
Yeah,
world.
they want to see everything.
Everything. They want to capture every human movement, every facial expression, every transaction, and map it all into a single, centralized, computationally legible system. It's an inherently colonizing impulse, the desire to claim total universality.
So Crawford is offering a counter map.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She draws on the environmental geographer Samantha Seville to propose a humble geography, because a traditional atlas, historically, was an instrument of empire, right?
Drawing borders, claiming resources, yeah.
Right. Crawford flips that. Her atlas doesn't claim to be a magical, omniscient view from nowhere. It zooms in on specific hidden landscapes, the mines, the data centers, the warehouse floors, to reveal the incredibly heady physical toll that sustains the illusion of AI.
So if the tech isn't an abstract algorithm living in the cloud, we have to start where it actually begins, which is in the dirt.
A literal dirt.
Yeah. Imagine the desert in Nevada, specifically a tiny unincorporated mining town called Silver Peak in Clayton Valley. It was essentially abandoned after the silver dried up a century ago.
But today, it sits on the edge of a massive underground lake of lithium.
Right, the foundational element for every rechargeable battery that powers our digital lives.
In the visual Crawford paints there is almost alien.
It's so weird. You have these massive iridescent green ponds baking in the desert sun. They pump lithium brine from deep underground into these evaporation pools. You see black pipes erupting from the salt-encrusted earth, pumping this toxic cocktail across the landscape.
This is where your smartphone is born.
It's just wild to think about.
It's the geologic layer of the technology. And Crawford points out that the current tech boom of Silicon Valley operates on the exact same extractive logic as the 1849 gold rush.
How so?
While you extract the wealth as rapidly as possible, you leave the environmental devastation behind in the local ecosystem, and you ensure that the people profiting in San Francisco never have to look at the toxic runoff in Nevada.
Right, out of sight, out of mind. But the extraction network is global, isn't it? Because you need rare earth minerals for semiconductors and sensors.
Oh, it's entirely planetary. Crawford takes us to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the demand for cobalt has fueled decades of horrific conflict and child labor.
Yeah.
Then we go to Inner Mongolia, to a city called Baotou. China supplies over 90% of the world's rare earth minerals. To make elements like neodymium usable for magnets in our hard drives, you have to dissolve them in massive volumes of sulfuric and nitric acid.
And the byproduct of that chemical process is staggering. In Baotou, there is an artificial black lake over 5 miles in diameter.
5 miles.
It holds roughly 180 million tons of highly toxic radioactive sludge.
And then down to Indonesia, to the islands of Bangka and Belitung. They produce 90% of the country's tin, which is used for the solder inside our devices.
And the conditions there are brutal. Gray market miners literally dive to the bottom of the ocean with rigged-up vacuum tubes to suck tin from the seabed. The landscape is destroyed, coral reefs are dead, and the coast is dotted with the graves of drowned miners.
All of this just to build the physical hardware that runs an algorithm.
Which completely dismantles the tech industry's favorite marketing narrative, right? Clean tech.
Oh, absolutely. We hear endless press releases about companies going carbon neutral or using AI to solve the climate crisis. But they rarely account for the gargantuan energy consumption required simply to compute the data.
Right. Let's talk about the carbon footprint, because this blew my mind. Crawford cites research from Emma Struble at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. They analyzed what it takes to train a single natural language processing model, the underlying tech for something like Siri or a chatbot.
Just one model.
Just one. Training that single model emits 660,000 pounds of carbon dioxide.
Which is just, to put that in perspective, that is the equivalent of the lifetime emissions of 5 gasoline-powered cars. And that includes the emissions from manufacturing the cars themselves.
Wait, really? 5 cars over their whole lifespan?
Yes. And we have to explain why it takes that much energy. Machine learning isn't just a simple calculation. It involves processing billions of parameters through massive matrices of data over and over again for weeks or months.
Right, trial and error on a massive scale.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This requires thousands of specialized microchips, GPUs, running at maximum capacity.
And those chips generate an insane amount of heat, which brings us to the water problem.
Right, keeping them cool.
The NSA built a massive data center in Bluffdale, Utah, specifically to store and process intercepted communications. Now, Utah is a desert state prone to severe droughts. Yet, this single facility requires an estimated 1.7 million gallons of water every single day just to keep the servers from melting down.
Every single day.
So what does this all mean for those green, carbon-neutral pledges tech companies make? I mean, when a tech CEO talks about an AI revolution, they're basically talking about a massive, planetary-scale mining and burning operation.
Yeah, the historian Lewis Mumford coined a term that Crawford adopts perfectly here. The mega machine.
The mega machine.
Right. Mumford originally used it to describe ancient projects like the pyramids and later the Manhattan Project. A mega machine is a vast, immensely complex, opaque system where thousands of human actors, logistics lines, and natural resources are strictly coordinated by a central authority.
Okay.
Inside a mega machine, human beings and ecosystems are reduced to interchangeable, disposable gears.
So the tech industry utilizes what Crawford calls strategic amnesia. They hand you a smooth, brushed aluminum phone wrapped in minimalist white packaging to deliberately sever your psychological connection to the Black Lakes in Mongolia or the evaporating water in Utah.
The aesthetic of minimalism is basically a tool of obfuscation. The cleaner the device looks, the more successfully it hides the violence of its own creation.
Wow. Okay, so we've established that the hardware extracts from the earth. But let's look at the software side. The algorithms themselves require a massive amount of scaffolding to function.
Right, they don't just run themselves.
Exactly. And that scaffolding is built out of human bodies. This takes us to the second layer of the mega machine, labor.
The physical toll on the human worker is perhaps the most fiercely hidden secret of the AI boom.
Yeah. Crawford takes us inside a 1.2 million square foot Amazon fulfillment center in Robbinsville, New Jersey. And the way she describes it, it's a study in grim contrasts.
It really is.
On one side of the facility, behind chain link fences, you have these bright orange Kiva robots. They glide smoothly, silently, perfectly coordinating the movement of thousands of pounds of inventory. It looks like an algorithmic ballet.
And then you look at the human side of the equation.
Right. The human workers are wearing knee braces, wrist guards, elbow bandages. The facility literally has vending machines on the floor that dispense free, over-the-counter painkillers, so workers can just pop a pill and keep moving.
Because while the robots are great at moving heavy shelves across a flat floor, they lack fine motor skills. Humans are still required for the fiddly tasks.
Like recognizing oddly shaped items, inspecting them for damage, and Tetris packing them into boxes?
But the system treats the humans as the least reliable components in the loop. Every movement is governed by an algorithm called the rate.
The rate, right. And the rate dictates exactly how many items a worker must pick and pack per hour. And it doesn't allow for fatigue or bathroom breaks.
It's relentless.
To make it worse, the size of the box the human has to pack is dictated by another algorithm called the matrix. The matrix constantly optimizes box sizes based on shipping costs and customer damage reports, so the worker can never get into a comfortable physical rhythm.
Right, because the box size constantly changes, forcing their bodies to adapt to new, awkward physical motions every few seconds, accelerating joint degradation.
It sounds like a nightmare.
It is. But if we zoom out and look at the history of labor, none of this surveillance or physical control is new. It's actually the logical endpoint of industrial capitalism. We can trace a direct line from 18th century workhouses straight to that Amazon warehouse.
Wait, really? How does a warehouse with Wi-Fi and robotics connect back to the 1700s?
Well, it starts with Adam Smith's theory of the division of labor. Taking a complex craft and breaking it down into tiny, de-skilled, repetitive tasks.
Okay, sure.
Karl Marx later noted that this process turns the human worker into a mere appendage of the machine. But the true architect of what we see in modern fulfillment centers is Frederick Winslow Taylor.
The father of scientific management.
Yes. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Taylor pioneered time motion studies. He would literally stand behind factory workers with a stopwatch, timing the microscopic motions of their hands and arms.
Wow.
He wanted to find the exact maximum physical output a body could generate before collapsing, in order to extract the maximum profit for the lowest wage. Taylorism was the analog precursor to the rate.
That makes so much sense. Crawford also brings up a fascinating piece of architectural history here, Samuel Bentham's inspection house. Now, I had always heard of Jeremy Bentham's panopticon, the prison design where guards can see all the inmates, but the inmates can't see the guards, so they just assume they're always being watched and police their own behavior.
Right. The panopticon is one of the most famous metaphors for state surveillance. But Samuel Bentham was Jeremy's brother, and he invented the concept first, not for a prison, but for a factory.
Really?
Yeah. Samuel was a naval engineer working in Russia in the 1780s. He was managing a group of untrained Russian peasant workers and was incredibly frustrated by his inability to monitor all of them.
So what did he do?
He designed a circular manufacturing plant with a raised central office. A few supervisors could sit in the middle and watch the physical labor of everyone simultaneously. It was designed purely to enforce workplace discipline and maximize output.
That is a vital historical correction, because we typically assume oppressive surveillance starts in prisons and then leaks into the workplace. But Crawford shows us that total surveillance was invented for labor extraction first.
Exactly. Modern AI workplace surveillance tracking a worker's retinal movements, keystrokes, and bathroom breaks down to the second is just Samuel Bentham's inspection house augmented by machine learning.
But this extraction isn't limited to physical warehouses. It bleeds into the digital space through something scholars call ghost work, or what writer Astor Taylor brilliantly calls phostomation.
Phostomation is just the perfect term.
It really is.
It describes a system that is aggressively marketed to the public as a fully autonomous magical AI, when in reality it is just a digital interface obscuring thousands of precarious, underpaid human workers doing the task manually.
Like the story of the startup X.AI. This is incredible. They launched an AI personal assistant named Amy. The pitch was that you just CC Amy on your emails, and her advanced natural language processing would read your messages, negotiate times with your contacts, and seamlessly book your calendar.
Sounds amazing, right?
The tech press went wild. Venture capitalists poured money into it.
But an investigative report by Bloomberg revealed the man behind the curtain.
Yeah, there was no magical AI. Amy was actually a team of exhausted human contract workers. They were working grueling 14-hour shifts behind the scenes, frantically speed-reading people's emails, annotating the data, and manually scheduling the meetings themselves to keep up the illusion for the investors.
One worker described clocking out and feeling completely numb, like they had become a machine.
It is Potemkin AI, and it perfectly mirrors one of the most famous hoaxes in history. In 1770, a Hungarian inventor named Wolfgang von Kempelen unveiled the Mechanical Turk.
Oh, the chess-playing machine.
Right. It was this lavish clockwork automaton dressed in exotic robes that sat at a chessboard. People would challenge it. The gears would whir. The mechanical arm would move the pieces and the machine would win.
Yeah.
It toured the courts of Europe. It beat Benjamin Franklin and Napoleon Bonaparte.
Everyone thought it was a mechanical miracle.
But inside the cabinet, crammed beneath the gears, sweating in the dark, was a human chess master operating the arm with magnets and levers.
And what does Amazon call its massive, decentralized, crowd-working platform today?
Amazon Mechanical Turk. They don't even hide the joke.
Right.
Amazon Mechanical Turk, or MTurk, is a platform where companies can post microtasks that algorithms still fail at. Identifying a stop sign in a photo, transcribing a snippet of audio, flagging inappropriate content. Hundreds of thousands of invisible workers around the globe perform these tasks for literally pennies apiece. Human intelligence is simply being used as cheap duct tape to patch the holes in failing AI software.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. To play devil's advocate, isn't this photomation just a temporary glitch? Silicon Valley's whole pitch is that we need these human gig workers now to train the models, but in 5 or 10 years we'll achieve artificial general intelligence. The systems will be self-sufficient and we won't need the ghost workers anymore. Are we ever actually going to see full automation, or is photomation the permanent business model?
That is the utopian promise. But Crawford's analysis of the economics suggests otherwise. As long as the global labor market is highly deregulated, it will almost always be cheaper and more flexible for capital to exploit a vulnerable human being in the global south than to engineer, power, and maintain a multi-billion-dollar robotic system to do the same task.
So it's just basic economics.
Yeah, the tech industry doesn't actually want to eliminate humans. It wants to transform humans into the cheapest, most disposable sensors in its network. Folktomation isn't a stepping stone, it's the structural business model.
Wow. And to manage that global decentralized workforce, Crawford reveals how the tech industry is attempting to monopolize time itself. Let's talk about Google's True Time.
This is where the engineering logistics become almost terrifyingly profound. Think about the infrastructure Google manages: Gmail, Search, Google Maps, cloud hosting. They use a globally distributed database system called Spanner. For Spanner to function without data corruption, a server in Tokyo and a server in New York have to agree on exactly what time it is down to the microsecond.
But Einstein taught us that time is relative, and in computer science you have network latency and clock drift. A quartz clock in a server in New York will naturally fall out of sync with a clock in Tokyo by a few milliseconds, just due to temperature variations.
Exactly. So Google created TrueTime. It is a proprietary time protocol. They installed GPS receivers and literal atomic clocks in their data centers around the world to establish a supreme hierarchy of timekeeping.
And the terminology that engineers use to describe this hierarchy is incredibly dark. They explicitly refer to a master clock that overrides and dictates time to the slave clocks.
The master-slave terminology is deeply embedded in computing architecture, and it carries the horrific implication that absolute control is synonymous with functionality. But the wild thing about TrueTime is how it handles uncertainty.
How so?
If the system detects that the clock drift between servers is too wide, Spanner will artificially slow down the transaction. It forces the servers to literally wait out the uncertainty before processing the data. Google essentially invented its own sovereign planetary time zone to ensure its mega machine runs without friction.
So we have the extraction of minerals from the earth and the extraction of sweat and time from labor. This naturally leads us to the third layer of the AI ecosystem. What happens when the mega machine comes for our digital bodies? For our memories, our faces, our conversations, we move into the realm of data.
And this is where we have to redefine what data actually is.
Yep.
We treat it like it's an abstract number, but it's human experience.
Crawford grounds this by showing us the NIST Special Database 32. It's maintained by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. When you open this data set, you aren't looking at code. You are looking at mugshots, photographs of people who've been arrested.
Yeah.
Many of them are visibly distressed. They have black eyes, bandages, tears streaming down their faces.
These are highly intimate moments of trauma, fear, and state coercion.
But to the computer scientists training facial recognition algorithms, the trauma is completely invisible. The humans are stripped of all context and converted into a technical substrate. They are just raw pixels used to calibrate a mathematical weight. How did we get to a point where human suffering is just considered raw material for a tech company?
Well, to understand that, we have to look at the history of how the AI field decided it needed so much data in the first place. For decades, the dominant approach to artificial intelligence was symbolic or rule-based.
Right.
If you wanted an AI to translate Russian to English, you would try to program all the grammatical rules of both languages into the computer. It was incredibly tedious and largely failed because human language is too chaotic.
But then comes the shift to statistical machine learning. Crawford points to Vannevar Bush in 1945. Bush was a key administrator for the Manhattan Project, and he envisioned post-war machines with enormous appetites that would compute the data of millions of citizens.
And that appetite reached a tipping point in the 1980s and 90s. At IBM, a researcher named Robert Mercer was working on speech recognition. Mercer and his team abandoned the idea of teaching computers grammar.
They took a totally different approach.
Yeah. They realized that if they just fed the computer an absolutely massive volume of translated texts, the algorithm could use brute force statistics to guess the probability of one word following another. It doesn't understand what a cat is, but statistically the word cat often appears near the word meow.
Mercer famously declared there's no data, like more data.
Exactly, because statistical pattern matching requires astronomical amounts of examples to map the edge cases. The model is essentially blind. It only learns the shape of an object by bumping into it a million times.
And if you need billions of data points to train a model, you can't possibly sit down and ask a billion people to sign a consent form, which brings us to the complete death of digital consent.
The tech industry simply decided that the entire internet, everything we upload, share, or write, was an open, unowned frontier, free for the taking.
The examples Crawford provides are incredibly invasive. Researchers at the University of Colorado installed a secret long-range camera pointing out of a window toward a campus walkway. They photographed over 1,700 students walking to class, without their knowledge, just to build their own facial recognition data set.
Unbelievable.
Duke University and Stanford ran similar projects, secretly filming thousands of students and cafe patrons. Much of this research was funded by military grants. They packaged these faces up and posted the data sets online for anyone to download.
And then you get to the corporate scale. In 2016, Microsoft released the MS Celeb dataset. They scraped roughly 10 million images of about 100,000 individuals from search engines. They justified this by claiming these people were celebrities and therefore public figures with no expectation of privacy.
But when researchers actually looked at the list of celebrities, it wasn't just movie stars. It included independent journalists, human rights activists, academics,
People whose physical safety relies on not being tracked by facial recognition.
The irony is so dark. They scraped the face of Laura Poitras, the documentary filmmaker who literally risked her life to help Edward Snowden expose global surveillance. They scraped Shoshana Zuboff, the Harvard scholar who coined the term surveillance capitalism.
That's absurd.
Their faces were harvested without permission to train the very systems they dedicate their lives to fighting against.
This brings us to a massive linguistic trick the tech industry plays on us. We have all heard the cliche, usually shouted at a TED Talk, data is the new oil.
Right. It's the ultimate buzzword. It means data is valuable.
Yes. But Crawford, building on the work of scholars like Luke Stark and Anna Lauren Hoffman, unpacks how toxic that metaphor really is. Framing data as a natural resource is a classic colonial mechanism.
How so?
If an imperial power wanted to extract timber, gold, or rubber from an indigenous land, the first thing they did was legally classify that land as wild, unowned, and unrefined. If the resource is just lying there, naturally occurring, it belongs to whoever has the technology to extract it.
Oh, wow. So if data isn't oil, what is it? It's more like human tissue. The tech industry is basically running a planetary blood bank and draining the donors while they sleep.
That is a much more accurate metaphor. Data is not a naturally occurring mineral. It is the intimate byproduct of human relationships, physical movements, and private thoughts. But if you call it oil, you chemically strip away the human context.
You sanitize it.
Exactly. You transform a photograph of a crying suspect or a private email between friends into a raw, unrefined commodity that must be drilled and refined in the data centers of Silicon Valley. It provides a moral alibi for mass theft.
I really want you, the listener, to think about this. Picture a photo you posted online 10 years ago, a picture of you at a party or a picture of your kids. Did you ever, for a single second, consent to them training a facial recognition system? No. But because of this ideology, this legal fiction that your memories are just unrefined crude oil, your life was absorbed into the mega machine.
And once that data is captured, it has to be organized. An algorithm looking at 10 million scraped photos just sees a chaotic mess of colored pixels. It doesn't know what a dog is, or a car, or a human face, until a human worker attaches a label to it.
Which takes us to Crawford's fourth chapter on classification. And this might be the most philosophically terrifying part of the book, because the moment you start categorizing human beings, you run into the dark history of pseudoscience.
Classification is never an objective description of the world. It is always an imposition of power.
Crawford proves this by taking us into the archives of the Penn Museum in Philadelphia. She walks into a room housing a collection of nearly 500 human skulls. These belong to Samuel Morton, a prominent American physician in the 1830s.
Morton is often considered the founder of American physical anthropology, which is a chilling legacy.
He amassed these skulls from all over the world. Many were taken from the graves of enslaved Africans or from indigenous burial grounds. Morton's overarching goal was to prove a biological hierarchy of the human races. So he would take a skull, meticulously pack it with lead shot to measure the cranial cavity, and then pour the shot into a graduated cylinder to determine brain volume.
Right.
He created elaborate tables and charts labeling the skulls with categories like Peruvian of the Inca race or lunatic.
And he consistently manipulated his data. He would pack the skulls of white Europeans more tightly with shot and pack the skulls of black and indigenous people more loosely to artificially prove that white people had larger brains and were therefore biologically superior.
And here's the crucial point. At the time, Morton wasn't viewed as a fringe crackpot. His measurements were celebrated as the absolute cutting edge of objective empirical science. His charts were literally cited by politicians in the American South to legally authorize and justify the institution of slavery.
This is a textbook example of what the sociologist Corinne Nor-Cetina calls epistemic machinery.
Epistemic machinery, the mechanisms we use to construct what society considers to be a fact.
Precisely. Morton used the epistemic machinery of his day-graduated cylinders, lead shot, and meticulously drafted tables to launder his own virulent racism into the domain of objective science. A classification system is a political weapon hiding behind the veil of mathematics. When you create a category, you aren't just describing reality, you are defining who belongs, who is normal, and who is an aberration.
And Crawford draws a direct, unbroken line from Morton's lead shot to the datasets training modern AI. Let's look at ImageNet. ImageNet is arguably the most famous dataset in the history of computer science. Spearheaded by AI researcher Fei-Fei Li, It contains over 14 million images categorized into thousands of nouns.
Right, it was foundational.
It was the training ground that sparked the modern deep learning revolution. But when Crawford teamed up with the artist and researcher Trevor Paglen to dig into the architecture of ImageNet, they looked specifically at the person category.
What they found was a digital recreation of Morton's worst impulses.
It was a nightmare. The person category wasn't just divided into man or woman. It contained over 2,800 deeply subjective, incredibly offensive subcategories. People's faces, scraped from the internet without their consent, were being manually labeled by anonymous crowd workers with tags like call girl, kleptomaniac, loser, slut, Jezebel, and drug addict.
These labels weren't just sitting in a file cabinet. They were the mathematical ground truth being fed into machine learning algorithms to teach them how to identify and categorize human beings in the real world.
This triggers what the philosopher Ian Hacking calls the looping effect.
Yes. Hacking pointed out that classifications interact with the people being classified. The categorization literally alters reality. If an institutional system, whether it's a 19th century asylum, a modern school board, or an AI risk assessment tool used by a bank labels a person as high risk or unemployable, that label dictates how society treats them.
Yeah, they get denied a loan, they get harassed by police, they lose opportunities.
Exactly. And that subsequent marginalization then serves as empirical proof to the system that the original classification was correct. The AI doesn't just read the world, it aggressively sculpts it.
Okay, I have to push back here. When Crawford and Paglen published this research and put together an art exhibition exposing ImageNet's labels, the computer science community was horrified. The ImageNet team eventually went in and deleted over 1 million images and scrubbed roughly 1,500 of the most offensive, unsafe categories. So isn't the problem fixed? Doesn't that give us an unbiased AI?
That is the most common defense in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Bias is just a software bug. We found the bug, we deleted the bad data, problem solved. But Crawford argues that this completely misses the fundamental violence of classification. You cannot debias a system that is inherently designed to flatten human complexity into machine-readable binaries.
She gives the example of the label associate professor.
Right. ImageNet kept associate professor because it seems like a safe, neutral, objective professional category. But think about the absurdity of training a visual algorithm to identify an associate professor based purely on a photograph of a person's face.
It's ridiculous.
It assumes that a highly complex social hierarchy, years of academic politics, and institutional tenure can be visually detected in someone's bone structure or their choice of a tweed jacket. It essentializes identity down to a pixel arrangement.
It forces the infinite fluid reality of human existence into a rigid box.
Anytime a machine attempts to classify human subjectivity, it commits an act of epistemological violence. There is no such thing as a safe category.
If classifying a person's identity or profession from a photograph is fraught with bias, what happens when a tech company claims their algorithm can look at a photo and classify a person's inner emotional state? That brings us to Section 5 and the incredibly lucrative, highly dubious industry of affect recognition.
This is the modern attempt to read the soul through the geometry of the face.
Crawford tells a story that sounds like an Indiana Jones expedition. It's 1967. A psychologist named Paul Ekman travels to the remote highlands of Papua New Guinea. He wants to prove a massive theory, that human emotions are biological constants, universal across all cultures and eras.
Yeah.
To prove this, he seeks out the 4 people who at that time had almost no contact with Western media or culture.
And his methodology was incredibly constrained. He brought a set of flashcards featuring photographs of Americans making highly exaggerated theatrical facial expressions, a huge smile, a deep scowl, wide-eyed terror.
He showed these flashcards to the 4 people and asked them to map the faces to a specific set of emotional stories. Ekman later admitted that the process was incredibly frustrating, comparing it to pulling teeth to get the answers he wanted. Yet he returned to the U.S. and declared victory.
Of course he did.
He concluded that there are 6 basic universal human emotions: happiness, sadness, fear, disgust, anger, and surprise, and that they can be reliably decoded purely from facial muscle movements.
Ekman built an empire on this theory. But Crawford pulls the camera back to look at the history of this idea, and it goes back to a 19th century French neurologist named Duchenne de Boulogne.
This part is so disturbing.
Duchenne wanted to map the muscles of the face. So he went into French asylums, found vulnerable patients who couldn't consent, and literally applied electrical probes to their faces. He shocked their muscles into forced, grotesque contortions and photographed them.
Wow.
Charles Darwin later used Duchenne's electrically induced photographs as foundational evidence for his own theories on the biological expression of emotion.
So the bedrock images defining what a universal human emotion looks like were actually artificially induced electrical shocks administered to asylum inmates. That is horrifying. And fast forward to today, the scientific consensus around Ekman's universal emotions is crumbling.
Crawford cites a monumental 2019 meta-analysis led by the neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett. Barrett's team reviewed 1,000 studies on emotion and concluded unequivocally that facial expressions are not universal fingerprints.
Because context is everything. You absolutely cannot infer that someone is happy just because the corners of their mouth are turned up. A smile could mean you are joyful, but it could also mean you are intensely nervous. It could be a sarcastic sneer.
Right, or it could be a gesture of cultural submission to an authority figure. Furthermore, humans frequently feel intense rage or crushing sadness without moving a single muscle in their face.
But despite the fact that the underlying science is contested and deeply flawed, tech companies have built a multi-billion-dollar industry around affect recognition. They are hard-coding Ekman's 6 universal emotions into machine learning algorithms.
And selling them to the most powerful institutions in society.
They sell this software to corporations to use in job interviews. You sit down in front of a webcam, and an AI analyzes your microexpressions to tell the hiring manager if you are enthusiastic or trustworthy enough for the job. They sell it to school districts to monitor video feeds of classrooms and generate reports on which students are paying attention and which are bored.
Which is terrifying for anyone who is neurodivergent or from a different cultural background or who simply processes information with a neutral expression.
And we really need to talk about how this gets weaponized in politics. And just to be incredibly clear to you listening right now, we are not taking any political sides here whatsoever. We're simply relaying Crawford's example to show how these highly subjective, scientifically contested AI tools are being weaponized in real-world partisan arenas.
Absolutely. The technology's claim to objective truth is what makes it a dangerous weapon for anyone to wield, regardless of your political views. What is the specific case?
So Crawford notes a moment when a conservative political blog ran video footage of Congresswoman Ilhan Omar through Amazon's facial analysis software Recognition. The blog authors took the algorithmic output, the AI's totally unscientific guess about her microexpressions during a speech, and used it to proudly declare that the software proved she was a pathological liar.
It is the reinvention of the polygraph, but with the aura of artificial intelligence giving it absolute authority. The software enforces a normative, highly rigid view of human psychology. It operates on the assumption that if you do not perform your emotions in the exact, standardized, statistically average way the algorithm expects, you are an anomaly, you're deceptive, you are a threat.
So we have a mega machine that extracts our data, forces us into rigid, biased classifications, and judges our deepest inner thoughts based on pseudoscience. Who benefits the most from this kind of omniscient categorizing power? Who has the ultimate desire to track, predict, and control human behavior at scale?
The state. This brings us to the militarization of civic life, because we cannot discuss AI without discussing its primary patron, the military-industrial complex.
Crawford dives into the Snowden archive for this. When Edward Snowden leaked millions of NSA documents in 2013, he didn't just expose surveillance, he exposed the birth of big data. The intelligence community, backed by massive secret budgets, were the pioneers of harvesting global data.
Oh, without a doubt.
Crawford lists programs with names that straight up sound like Marvel villains. You have Treasure Map, a program tasked with mapping the entire global internet, every router, every endpoint, every device, constantly. You have Fox Acid, designed to exploit browser vulnerabilities to silently hijack a target's computer.
The development of artificial intelligence in the United States has been inextricably linked to the military for decades, heavily funded by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency.
Right.
Because the funding comes from the military, the conceptual architecture of AI is steeped in the logic of war. Algorithms are built to optimize for situational awareness, threat detection, and target acquisition.
But Crawford points out that the truly terrifying shift isn't just that the military uses AI, it's that those exact same battlefield tools have trickled down to local city halls and municipal police departments. The boundary between the military and the civic sphere has completely collapsed.
We see this with companies like Palantir. Palantir is a massive data analytics firm founded by Peter Thiel, originally heavily funded by the CIA's venture capital arm. Their software was designed to help intelligence agencies track insurgents in war zones.
But then, as Crawford notes, the Los Angeles Police Department partnered with Palantir. Sociologist Sarah Brain spent time studying the LAPD's use of the software, and she found that it fundamentally altered the DNA of policing.
Oh, so?
It turned ordinary B-cops into localized intelligence agents. They weren't just responding to 911 calls, they were proactively feeding data into a massive dragnet, building complex network graphs of citizens' relationships, generating automated risk scores for neighborhoods.
And it infects social safety nets as well. Crawford details a devastating failure in Michigan. The state government decided to automate its unemployment benefits system to cut administrative costs. They deployed a system called MIDAS, the Michigan Integrated Data Automated System.
And MIDAS was an absolute disaster. The algorithm was supposedly designed to detect fraud, but it operated with such ruthless, opaque logic that it falsely accused over 40,000 residents of committing unemployment fraud.
And it wasn't just a letter in the mail saying, hey, we made a mistake. The automated system triggered immediate catastrophic penalties. It garnished people's wages, intercepted their tax refunds, and hit them with massive fines, sometimes quadrupling the amount they allegedly owed.
People were driven into bankruptcy. Lives were completely ruined. And they couldn't even appeal the decision easily because the accusation was generated by a black box algorithm that no one at the unemployment office actually understood.
Right.
It begs a massive question. If an unemployment system is conceptually designed to help vulnerable people survive a crisis, why is it being managed by command and control software designed to hunt threats?
Because when the state adopts the tools of the mega machine, it adopts the philosophy of the mega machine. It replaces civic care with militaristic suspicion. The system no longer views the citizen as a human being in need of support. It views the citizen as a statistical anomaly to be mitigated, a potential drain on resources, or a fraudster waiting to strike. The architecture of AI optimizes for punishment and exclusion because it is cheaper and more computationally efficient than empathy.
We have traced this incredibly dark path. From the lithium mines tearing up the earth, to the gig workers suffering in the shadows, to the theft of our faces, to the state watching our every move. What is the underlying belief system that allows the architects of this technology to sleep at night? Where are they trying to take us?
Well, in her conclusion, Crawford diagnoses the central ideology of Silicon Valley as enchanted determinism.
Enchanted determinism. Break that down for me.
It is the cultural trap we all fall into. It's the tendency to view artificial intelligence as an autonomous, magical, almost divine force that operates outside of human control. Enchanted determinism manifests in two ways. There is the utopian narrative. AI is a benevolent superintelligence that will soon cure cancer, solve climate change, and usher in an era of post-scarcity luxury.
And then there's the dystopian narrative. AI is a Terminator, a runaway superbrain that will eventually wake up, realize humans are inefficient, and wipe us out.
Exactly. But Crawford argues that both the utopian dream and the dystopian nightmare are equally wrong, and more importantly, they serve the exact same corporate purpose.
How do they serve the corporations?
Because both narratives treat the algorithm as an independent, inevitable agent. If AI is a magical savior, or if it is an unstoppable sci-fi demon, then the tech billionaires who are actually building it are completely absolved of moral responsibility. They can just throw their hands up and say, don't look at our labor practices, don't look at our carbon footprint. We are just ushering in the inevitable evolution of the cosmos.
I see.
Enchanted determinism hides the mundane reality. AI is not a god. It is just an incredibly resource-intensive tool used by a small group of powerful men to consolidate global wealth and control.
Which perfectly explains the absolute wildest, most dystopian part of Crawford's coda, space colonization. You have tech billionaires like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. They have leveraged this digital mega machine to amass wealth on a scale that would make a Roman emperor blush. But when they look at the fact that their data centers and supply chains are rapidly depleting the Earth's finite resources, they don't conclude that we need to conserve or live sustainably.
No, conservation is viewed as a failure.
Right. Bezos has explicitly stated that his greatest fear is stasis, the idea that humanity might have to stop growing, stop extracting, and cap our energy usage to survive on Earth. He finds that terrifying. So his solution, and Musk's solution, is to just blast the mega machine into orbit. They want to mine asteroids. They want to strip mine the moon.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the extractive mindset. The logic of settler colonialism projected onto the solar system.
The frontier must continually expand, no matter the cost, because the machine demands more data, more minerals, more energy.
This is why Crawford's book is such a monumental contribution to the philosophy of technology. Most books on AI treat it like a math problem. Crawford treats it like a planetary ecology. She brilliantly proves that AI is not some magical rupture in human history. It is simply the latest, most aggressively accelerated manifestation of hypercapitalism.
And that diagnosis requires a completely new prescription. You cannot fix the problems of AI by hiring a corporate ethics board or by tweaking a few weights in a neural network to make it slightly less racist.
You can't code your way out of a systemic extraction crisis.
Precisely. That is why Crawford ends with a call for connected movements for justice. Because AI touches the earth, labor, and civil rights, fighting for ethical technology means you have to fight on all those fronts simultaneously. You cannot demand algorithmic fairness without also demanding climate justice for the communities living next to the lithium mines and labor rights for the ghost workers in the global south. They are all nodes in the exact same power structure.
I want to end by speaking directly to you, the listener. The next time you pull out your phone to ask a digital assistant a question or use a filter on a photo, I want you to feel the weight of it. AI isn't an algorithm floating softly in the cloud. It is the physical battery burning hot against your palm. It is the aching joints of the warehouse worker who packed the box. It is the camera on your street corner, logging your face without your permission. It is a massive, heavy, creaking machine built across the entire planet.
The illusion of weightlessness is the most dangerous product the tech industry sells.
And it leaves me with one final thought to mull over. We've seen that this registry of power is built entirely on finite things. It requires the physical lithium trapped under the Nevada desert. It requires the billions of gallons of water in drought-stricken Utah. It requires the limited physical endurance of human bodies. So what happens to the grand illusion of infinite, godlike artificial intelligence when the planet simply runs out of the raw materials to feed it? What will the physical ruins of this mega machine look like a century from now? Will our descendants wander through rusted, dead data centers the same way we look at the drained, abandoned gold mines of the 19th century?
A haunting thought. The cloud of rocks inevitably returning to the earth.